The key fob in my hand bears my husband's company logo. The one he swore was just a client. My school bag still aches from where I swung it into that masked attacker's face. Now I'm standing in the gym parking lot, staring at the firewall that shouldn't exist, and my phone just buzzed with Michael's biometrics. 145 beats per minute. He's not napping, he's lying. And I'm holding the proof. The SUV's engine growls behind me. I have 3 seconds to decide. Run, or find out what else he's been hiding. The blue glow of the dual monitors washed over Sarah's face, highlighting the fine lines around her eyes. She leaned forward, the leather of her desk chair creaking under the shift in weight. On the left screen, Michael's biometric dashboard flickered. A jagged crimson line surged upward, peaking at 160 beats per minute. Sarah gripped the edge of the mahogany desk. The wood felt cold, polished to a mirror finish. According to his shared calendar, Michael sat in a budget meeting at the downtown firm during this spike. No one burned 300 calories sitting through a slide deck on quarterly projections. Her pulse throbbed in her fingertips. She clicked through the GPS history, matching the timestamps. The coordinates placed him at home, right here, 2 hours ago. He had claimed he worked through lunch. A floorboard groaned in the hallway. Sarah froze. The scent of Michael's sandalwood cologne drifted through the cracked door before he appeared. He leaned against the frame, loosening his silk tie. "Rough day?" Michael asked. His voice carried a smooth, practiced resonance. "I stayed busy," Sarah said. She minimized the biometric window, her cursor trembling over the exit button. He crossed the room, his heavy footsteps muffled by the Persian rug. He placed a hand on her shoulder. His palm radiated an unnatural heat, pressing through the thin cotton of her blouse. "You spend too much time in the dark, Sarah. It makes people imagine things." He squeezed, his thumb brushing the base of her neck. Sarah stared at her own reflection in the darkened monitor, watching his shadow loom over hers. She waited for the rhythmic pop-pop of his knuckles, the sound that usually preceded his most convincing lies. When it came, the sound was like a dry twig snapping in a silent forest. "I'm just going to lie down for a bit," Michael murmured, his voice dropping to that breathy, hesitant register he used when he wanted to disappear. "That meeting? It took a lot out of me. I need a nap. Just a deep rest, you know?" Sarah nodded, her jaw tight. She waited until the bedroom door clicked shut. Then, she reopened the dashboard. The data didn't lie. While Michael claimed to be drifting into sleep, his heart rate wasn't falling. It was climbing. 110, 130. The graph looked like a mountain range. He wasn't sleeping. He was undergoing an intense physical trial right there in their house, while the silence suggested nothing but peace. It was a biological impossibility. The next morning, the air in the faculty lounge at the high school smelled of burnt coffee and old paper. Sarah sat at a corner table, her laptop open, her eyes tracking the blinking cursor. Dave Miller slid into the chair across from her, smelling faintly of a Monster energy drink and the static of 1,000 circuits. He didn't say hello. He just tapped a sugar packet against the table in a rapid, nervous rhythm. "This is a Tuesday problem," Dave muttered, glancing at the date on the packet. "I can fix Tuesday problems." "What are we looking at, Sarah?" "The GPS trail ends at the corner of 5th and Main," Sarah said, her voice a low whisper. "Every day at 2 p.m., the signal just dies. It's like he walks into a lead box, but his heart rate stays through the roof. I need to know what's in that dead zone." Dave leaned in, his dark circles making him look like a weary raccoon. "There's a gym there. The Iron Vault. It's private, high-end. They use a system that blocks outside signals, like a thick stone wall that keeps the world out. But their internal network is a different story. It's like a door with a heavy bolt, but the hinges are rusted. "Can you get us in?" Sarah asked. Dave pulled another sugar packet from his pocket. "I can't walk you through the front door, but I can show you the back alley. If we match his device ID to their local traffic, we can see exactly when he checks in and what machines he's using. It's like following a trail of breadcrumbs through a dark wood." They spent the next hour huddled over the screen. Dave's fingers moved across the keys with a frantic, spider-like grace. He wasn't just typing, he was navigating a maze. Sarah watched the data flow, a river of numbers that slowly began to take the shape of a man's life. "There," Dave pointed. "Every time your husband's GPS goes dark, a device with his signature pings the vault's internal system. But he's not hitting the treadmills or the weights. He's hitting the basement levels, the parts of the building that aren't on the public floor plan." The realization chilled Sarah more than the air conditioning. Michael wasn't just working out. He was hiding. The following afternoon, Sarah decided she couldn't wait for Dave's next update. The uncertainty was a physical weight, a pressure in her chest that felt like a localized cortisol spike. She drove to the park near the iron vault, the tires of her Subaru crunching on the gravel path. The park was a wide-open green space, the kind of place that should feel safe. But today, every jogger looked like a shadow, and every parked car felt like an eye. The wind whistled through the oak trees, a low-frequency moan that seemed to mask the sound of everything else. Sarah walked toward the empty swing set, the rusted chains swaying rhythmically in a breeze that wasn't quite strong enough to move them. She clutched her shoulder bag, the weight of her laptop pressing against her hip. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by the roar of an engine. A black SUV skidded onto the grass, the tires tearing through the sod. Sarah froze. The door swung open, and a figure in a dark hoodie and a face mask lunged toward her. It wasn't like the movies. There was no choreographed dance. It was a scramble of limbs and the smell of hot exhaust and cheap laundry detergent. The man reached for her bag, his fingers catching the strap. "Give it here," he hissed. Sarah didn't think. She swung the heavy bag with everything she had. The corner of the laptop hit the man's ribs with a sickening thud. He gasped, stumbling back. Sarah didn't wait for a second attempt. She turned and bolted toward her car, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She could hear his boots pounding the grass behind her, a sound like a drumbeat of approaching doom. She reached the Subaru, fumbled the door open, and threw herself inside. She slammed the lock just as a heavy fist thudded against the glass. She shifted into reverse, the engine screaming as she peeled away, leaving the masked figure standing in a cloud of dust and shredded grass. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. She drove 3 blocks before she realized her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the wheel. She pulled over into a grocery store parking lot, the bright red Target sign offering a hollow sense of normalcy. As she reached into the passenger footwell to straighten her bag, her hand brushed against something cold and metallic. It wasn't hers. It was a black plastic key fob, dropped during the struggle. She picked it up, her eyes narrowing. On the back, embossed in silver, was a logo, a stylized shield with the initials SDS Secure Data Solutions. That was the firm Michael claimed was his biggest client, the firm that supposedly kept him in budget meetings all afternoon. The man who had just tried to mug her wasn't a random criminal. He was connected to the very life Michael had built out of thin air. Sarah sat in the silence of her car, the smell of her own sweat and the ozone from the laptop filling the small space. The mystery wasn't just about a hidden gym or an elevated heart rate anymore. It was a physical threat, a hand reaching out from the darkness to pull her under. She arrived home to find the front door wide open. Panic flared again, but then she saw Michael's car in the driveway. She walked inside, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. The house smelled of drywall dust and ozone. Michael stood in the hallway, a cordless drill in his hand. He was mounting a small black dome to the ceiling joist. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. Michael turned, a practiced smile spreading across his face. He cracked his knuckles, pop, pop, and leaned in just a bit too close. "I heard about the park, Sarah. The neighborhood app is blowing up. There's a prowler, someone in a black SUV." He stepped down from the ladder, his hand hovering near her shoulder, but not quite touching. "I can't have you being unsafe. I'm installing these motion-activated cameras. High definition. They link straight to my phone. If anyone even breathes on our porch, I'll know." Sarah looked up at the black lens. It looked like a dead eye, staring back at her. "Inside the house, Michael? You're putting cameras in the hallway? It's for your protection," he said, his voice dropping to that soft, breathy register. I worry about you. This way, the house is a fortress, a safe place. No one gets in or out without a record." Sarah felt the walls of the hallway closing in. The house wasn't a fortress. It was a cage. Every movement she made, every room she entered, would be a data point on Michael's phone. He was turning her own home into a laboratory where she was the specimen. Subverted Beat 2.1. Sarah stood in the center of the kitchen, watching the small green light on the new camera flicker to life. She told herself this was a good thing. Michael was being proactive. He was a protector. After the terror in the park, the idea of a high-tech shield around her life felt logical. It was the smart move, using technology to bridge the gap of her own physical vulnerability. She even felt a brief wash of relief, a sense that the chaos of the outside world could be held at bay by these silent digital sentries. "Thank you, Michael," she whispered. And for a moment, the tension in her shoulders dissipated. She imagined the cameras as invisible guards, standing watch while she slept. Michael smiled, that warm, architectural smile that had first won her over. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "Anything for you, Sarah. We're safe now. Totally secure." She spent the evening moving through the house, deliberately ignoring the black domes. She felt a sense of victory. She had the key fob, she had Dave, and now she had a husband who was finally paying attention to her safety. She even managed to eat a few bites of salad, the first food she'd kept down all day. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, a small detail began to itch at the back of her mind. She was sitting in her office, the door cracked, when she heard the faint whir of a motor. She froze. It was the camera in the hallway. It wasn't just sitting there. It was rotating. She stood up and walked to the door. The camera lens was pointed directly at her office. As she moved to the left, the lens followed. To the right, it tracked her again. It wasn't a wide-angle security sweep. It was a target lock. The realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen was being sucked out of the room. She pulled out her phone and tried to log into the home security app. Access denied. She tried again, her fingers trembling. Invalid credentials. Contact primary administrator. Michael was the primary administrator. He hadn't built a fortress to keep the prowler out. He had built a cage to keep her in. Every safety feature he had described, the motion alerts, the high-def recording, the remote monitoring, was a tool for her own surveillance. He wasn't protecting her from the man in the SUV. He was the man in the SUV, or at least the one who sent him. The house, once her sanctuary, now felt like an interrogation room. She looked up at the camera, and for the first time, she saw it for what it truly was: a digital leash. She wasn't the wife being cared for. She was the variable being managed. The deep rest he took every afternoon wasn't a nap. It was the only time he wasn't watching her every move. The stakes hadn't just changed. They had collapsed. She was trapped in a house that reported her every breath to the man she was trying to expose. Sarah waited. She forced her breathing to remain rhythmic, a steady cadence that wouldn't trigger any distress alerts on the system Michael had surely synced to her biometrics. She waited until the house settled into the deep, artificial quiet of 3 a.m. She knew Michael's routine. At this hour, he entered his deep rest phase, a state of such profound physical stillness that even the house seemed to hold its breath. She slipped out of bed, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood. She avoided the center of the hallway, hugging the wall where the camera's blind spot should be, based on the lens's focal length. She reached the garage door. The air here was colder, smelling of old motor oil and the heavy, cloying scent of gasoline. Her target was the Subaru. She had a small GPS tracker, no bigger than a quarter, that Dave had given her. She just needed to slip it under the rear bumper. She pressed the button to the garage. The motor groaned, a low metallic protest that sounded like a scream in the silence. The heavy wooden door began to rise, the chain rattling against the track. Suddenly, the sound changed. The smooth hum became a jagged, grinding screech. The door stopped halfway, then began to plummet. Sarah lunged back, her heel catching on a stray garden hose. She fell hard, her elbows barking against the concrete. The heavy door slammed shut with a bone-shaking thud just inches from her toes. The vibration traveled through the floor, rattling her teeth. The garage lights flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, the only sound was the frantic ticking of the cooling engine and the heavy thud of Sarah's own heart. She reached out, her hand brushing against the cold, greasy metal of the door. It wouldn't budge. The manual release cord was tucked high up, out of reach. She realized with a jolt of terror that the door hadn't failed. It had been commanded. Michael wasn't in a deep rest. He was awake, watching her through the safety cameras, playing with the house like a puppeteer. She was a mouse in a box, and he was leaning on the lid. She scrambled back into the kitchen, her breath coming in jagged sobs. She needed to find something, anything, to prove what he was doing. She retreated to the mudroom, her hands fumbling in the dark. She felt the spare tire well of her own car, a place she hadn't checked in months. Her fingers brushed against something soft, not rubber, but fabric. She pulled it out. It was a shoe. A high-end, specialized racing shoe. The sole worn down in a specific pattern of high-intensity friction. It smelled of scorched rubber and sweat. As she held the shoe, Buster, their golden retriever, began to whimper. The dog was huddled under the kitchen table, his tail tucked so tightly it was pressed against his stomach. He wasn't looking at Sarah. He was staring at the closed door of Michael's home office. Every time Michael took a step inside that room, Buster let out a low, mourning howl. Exactly 4 barks every time. The 4-bark warning. The dog knew animals didn't need spreadsheets or GPS trackers. They felt the shift in the air, the predatory hum that now radiated from Michael like heat from a furnace. Sarah knew she had to leave. The house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene waiting to happen. She waited until dawn, then told Michael she was going to the school early to prep for a lab. He didn't look up from his coffee. He just cracked his knuckles, pop, pop, and nodded. "Drive safe, Sarah. Remember, I'm watching the feed. I'll know you're okay." She didn't go to the school. She drove toward the coordinates Dave had pulled from the last live ping Michael's phone had sent before the blackout. The road wound higher into the hills, the suburban sprawl giving way to dense forest and jagged rock faces. The trailhead was a lonely stretch of gravel tucked behind a stand of weeping willows. The air here was still, the only sound the crunch of her own footsteps. It felt like the edge of the world. As she stepped onto the path, a low growl vibrated through the air. A massive German shepherd, its eyes fixed on her throat, stepped out from behind a mossy log. Behind it stood a man with skin like cracked leather, holding a rusted shovel like a club. "Private property," the man barked. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "Stay on the path or get off the mountain." "I'm looking for my husband," Sarah said, her voice small against the vast silence of the woods. "He hikes here." The man, James Wilson, spat on the ground. "No one hikes here, lady. Not unless they're looking to break their neck or their bank account. This is a graveyard for fools." He stepped closer, the shovel head scraping against a stone. "Now turn around, before the dog decides your lunch." Sarah backed away, her heart hammering. She saw the glint of a camera mounted to a tree trunk. Another black dome, identical to the ones in her hallway. This wasn't a hiking trail. It was a perimeter. She turned to run, but her foot caught on a hidden root. She tumbled down a small embankment, sliding through a dense briar patch. The thorns tore at her skin, the sharp points biting into her arms and face. She scrambled up, the sting of the scratches a secondary concern to the sound of the dog's frantic barking behind her. She made it back to the car, her blouse torn and her skin mapped with red welts. She sat in the driver's seat, the heater blasting, and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked like a survivor of a wreck. She pulled out her phone. Dave had sent a file. Decrypted. She opened it. It wasn't a budget report. It was a ledger. Names, dates, and astronomical sums of money. Michael wasn't an architect anymore. He was a ghost. A top-tier athlete in the midnight sprints, an illegal underground endurance racing circuit. The deep rest was his recovery period. The meetings were training sessions, and the bets. Sarah's breath hitched. Michael wasn't just racing. He was betting their entire life. Every cent in their joint savings, their 401s, the equity in the house, it was all gone, funneled into a winner-take-all pot for a race scheduled for the 4th of July. She felt a cold, hollow sensation in her gut. Logic couldn't fix this. The data had provided the answer, but the answer was total ruin. She drove home in a trance. She walked through the front door, ignoring the cameras, and went straight to the kitchen. She pulled up their bank portal on her laptop. Balance, $0. The screen was a white, sterile void. 20 years of work, of precision, and hedging against catastrophe, wiped out by a man who had traded his soul for a shot of adrenaline. The garage door opened. Michael walked in, smelling of high-octane fuel and the crisp mountain air. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't smile. He didn't crack his knuckles. He just stood there, his body coiled like a spring. "You went to the trailhead," he said. It wasn't a question. "You stole our life, Michael," Sarah said, her voice flat. "The house, the savings. You put it all on a race?" Michael stepped toward her. The soft, hesitant man was gone. In his place was something hard and predatory. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, pinning her against the heavy oak workbench in the kitchen. His hands, usually so gentle, felt like iron bands around her wrists. "I didn't steal it," he hissed, his face inches from hers. "I invested it. Do you know what it's like to feel the world blur at 100 miles an hour? To know that your heart is the only thing keeping you from the grave? You and your spreadsheets. You've never lived, Sarah. You've just measured." He squeezed her wrists until she gasped. "The 4th of July, that's the payday. I win and we're set for life. I lose." He trailed off, a dark shadow crossing his eyes. "I don't lose." Sarah looked into his eyes and saw the addiction, the madness that had replaced the man she loved. She knew she couldn't reason with him. She had to act. She remembered her biology lessons. The brachial plexus, the cluster of nerves that controlled the arm. She shifted her weight, bringing her thumb down with surgical precision on the soft tissue of his inner elbow. Michael let out a sharp cry of pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She shoved him back, the heavy workbench groaning as he hit it. She bolted for the back door, her heart a frantic drumbeat in her ears. She threw the door open, but she didn't find the backyard. She found Jennifer Martinez, her neighbor, standing on the porch with two men who looked like they were carved from granite. Subverted beat 3.4. The sight of Jennifer brought a sudden, overwhelming surge of hope to Sarah's chest. Jennifer was the one person who had been there for her, the woman who brought sympathy cookies and listened to her complaints about Michael's late hours. Jennifer was a mother, a neighbor, a friend. "Jennifer, thank God," Sarah gasped, reaching out for her. "Call the police. Michael, he's lost his mind. He's hurt me." Jennifer stepped forward, her face a mask of concern. She took Sarah's hands in hers, her touch warm and familiar. "Oh, honey, you're shaking. It's okay. I've got you. Everything is going to be fine now." Sarah felt the tension drain out of her. She leaned into Jennifer, the smell of lavender and home-baked sugar, a sudden, sweet relief in the middle of the nightmare. "He took everything, Jennifer. The money, the house. He's involved in something terrible." Jennifer nodded, her eyes soft. "I know, dear. I know all about it. We've been watching over you." She turned to the two men behind her. "Help her inside. She needs to sit down." Sarah allowed the men to guide her back into the kitchen. She felt a sense of victory, a belief that the smart move, reaching out to her community, had finally paid off. She sat at the table, her breath slowing. The crisis was over. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, looking up at Jennifer. "I don't know what I would have done." Jennifer smiled. But as the light hit her eyes, Sarah noticed something wrong. The warmth didn't reach them. They were scanning the room, cold and predatory, like a hawk looking for a mouse. Jennifer didn't go to the phone. Instead, she walked over to Michael, who was rubbing his arm. She didn't scold him. She didn't call the police. She handed him a small silver vial. "You need to keep your edge, Michael," Jennifer said, her voice losing its soccer mom lilt. It was sharp, professional, and terrifyingly cold. The 4th of July is a big night for all of us. Don't let a little domestic dispute ruin the purse. The truth hit Sarah like a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jennifer wasn't the helpful neighbor. She was the bookie. The sympathy cookies weren't a gesture of friendship. They were a way to get inside the house, to scout the perimeter, to ensure the asset, Michael, was being properly managed. "You?" Sarah breathed, the word a puff of cold air. Jennifer turned to her, the mask of the neighbor completely gone. "Don't be so dramatic, Sarah. It's just business. Michael is the best runner we've had in years. But he's expensive, and he's reckless." She sat across from Sarah, her hands folded neatly on the table. "He didn't just bet your savings, honey. He put a lien on your family farm, the one in the valley. The one your mother fought so hard to keep." Sarah felt her heart stop. The farm, her ancestral legacy, the only thing that connected her to a past that wasn't defined by Michael's lies. "You can't do that," Sarah whispered. "We already did," Jennifer said. She hummed a low, haunting funeral dirge, the sound vibrating through the kitchen. "And since Michael is currently in default on his training loans, the circuit has already started the paperwork. If he doesn't win on the 4th, the farm is ours. And you—" She leaned in, her eyes boring into Sarah's. "You're a liability. You know too much. You've been digging where you don't belong." She nodded to the two enforcers. They stepped forward, their shadows looming over Sarah. "Keep her here. If she tries to leave, make sure she doesn't. We have a race to run." Sarah was trapped, not by a stranger, but by the very person she had trusted to save her. The safety of her community had been the ultimate trap. The kitchen felt like a tomb. The two enforcers stood by the doors, their arms crossed, their faces like stone. Michael had disappeared into his office, likely to prep for the race that was now only hours away. Jennifer sat at the table, calmly scrolling through a tablet, the blue light reflecting in her predatory eyes. Sarah looked around her kitchen. To anyone else, it was a room for cooking. To her, it was a laboratory. She saw the bottles under the sink, concentrated ammonia, bleach, industrial-strength floor stripper. She knew the chemical equations. She knew what happened when you mix them in the right proportions. "I need some water," Sarah said, her voice steady. Jennifer didn't look up. "Fine, but stay where I can see you." Sarah walked to the sink. She moved slowly, her movements clinical. She reached under the cabinet, her fingers finding the bottles. She didn't just pour them out. She mixed them into a large glass bowl, adding a handful of powdered dishwasher detergent to act as a catalyst. The reaction was instantaneous. A thick, acrid white smoke began to pour from the bowl, a roiling cloud that smelled of stinging chemicals and scorched air. "What the?" one of the enforcers shouted, lunging forward. The smoke hit him like a wall. He coughed, his eyes watering, his hands clawing at his throat. The kitchen was suddenly a white void, the overhead lights turned into a disorienting glare. Sarah didn't run for the door. She knew they'd be waiting there. She dropped to her knees, where the air was clearer, and crawled toward the basement door. She slipped inside, the cold air of the lower level, a sharp contrast to the stinging heat of the kitchen. She scrambled down the stairs, her heart hammering. She didn't head for the main exit. She headed for the coal chute, a narrow, reinforced window that Michael had neglected to upgrade. She squeezed through, the rough concrete scraping her shoulders, and tumbled onto the damp grass of the backyard. She didn't run for her car. She ran for the woods. But as she ran, she pulled out her phone. She didn't call 911. Not yet. She opened the biometric app, the one Michael had used to track her. She had the administrative override that Dave had built for her. She accessed Michael's synced Fitbit, the one he wore even during the race to monitor his performance. She didn't shut it down. She overclocked it. She sent a series of high-frequency pings to the device, forcing it to display a false heart rate. On Michael's heads-up display, miles away on the racing trail, his heart rate would suddenly jump from 150 to 220. The death alert would scream in his ear, a digital siren warning him of imminent cardiac arrest. She watched the data on her screen. The GPS signal for Michael's device was moving at 80 miles an hour through the mountain pass. Suddenly, it slowed. It wavered. Then, it stopped. Michael had forfeited. The fear of his own body, the one thing he couldn't control with a lie, had broken him. Sarah stood on the sidewalk of her own street, her clothes torn, her face streaked with soot and sweat. A fleet of black SUVs, real ones this time, with federal plates, pulled up to the house. A woman in a sharp suit stepped out. It was Elena, the gym regular Sarah had seen every day at the Iron Vault. She wasn't a socialite. She was an undercover agent with the FBI's illegal gambling task force. "Miss Johnson," Elena said, her voice crisp and professional. "We got the data you uploaded. It was enough for a warrant. The betting ring is done." Sarah watched as they led Michael out of the house in handcuffs. He looked small, his face pale, his eyes darting around in a state of sheer physical panic. He looked at Sarah, but she didn't look away. She watched him with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a failed experiment. Jennifer followed, her soccer mom ponytail disheveled, her predatory eyes finally full of fear. The humming neighbor was silent at last. A week later, Sarah sat on the porch of her family farm. The air was thick with the scent of mown hay and the sweet, heavy heat of a Georgia summer. The silence was real here, not the artificial quiet of a monitored house. She looked down at her watch. Her heart rate was 72 beats per minute. Steady, calm, predictable. She had lost her husband, her savings, and her sense of security. But as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the fields in shades of gold and violet, she realized she had gained something more important. She had her truth. And the data, for the first time in her life, was finally, beautifully, still. The end. Do not proceed past this point.